As I spoke yesterday, I gave a little bit of my testimony in a message. In 8th grade, I gave my life to the Lord as it began our spiritual journey, my spiritual journey. My wife and I both grew up here at First Baptist Church. This is Jamie, and we dated through high school, went through Hyles Anderson College and married, and been working here. This is our 40th year to work here at First Baptist Church. You know, you kids, you for the most part, you all go to fundamental independent Baptist churches. You have pastors whose hearts are right with God, and you have youth pastors who love you and have worked hard to bring you here. But you know, we live in a world that's tough, that's full of sin, where Satan is doing his best to try to break down our churches, break down our homes, and you will more than likely live at a point in time in your life where a leader will fail you. It's just going to happen. You're not going to be immune from it no matter what church you go to. Again, in 8th grade, when my spiritual journey began, during my training years, I had a lot of great preachers and a lot of great Sunday school teachers, but not all of them lived for the Lord. Many of them, if I may, have failed in church. They failed in marriage. Some were preachers at conferences, or preachers at camp, or preachers in college chapel, or no longer in the ministry. My parents, as I mentioned yesterday, had a time where they struggled with things and left this church for a little while. During my adult years, my pastor went through great struggles in the 80s and was attacked, and as teenagers and young people in this church, it was very hard to live through. We lost many friends, as I mentioned yesterday. My pastor died. I'll never forget the day and the time when Brother Hyles passed away during heart surgery. I remember leaving the college and getting word that he had passed away while our high school kids were holding prayer meetings at our school. I remember walking in the back door knowing that Brother Hyles was already in heaven. As young people were praying, I saw my daughter and her friends praying, crying and weeping, all the while knowing that he was already in heaven. And I'll never forget walking on that platform and having to tell the student body that Brother Hyles was gone, he was in heaven. And it was to use the word traumatic would be an understatement. It was very difficult and very traumatic time for all of us. But you know, we've been through some things, my wife and I both, and we've stayed the course, if I may. Amen. And you know, I didn't know back then what all the decisions that I made back then, what it would mean one day. You know, when we decided as young people, when many of our friends had left, we decided, you know, we never talked even about leaving. Not one time did my wife ever say, you know what, we need to look someplace else. We need to go to a different kind of church. Not one time did she ever say, you know what, I'm tired of this. I'm sick of this. We need to leave. Not one time, young people, did she ever discourage me. Not one time. And young people, we live in a day and age where sin abounds. But you know, just because men fail doesn't mean God failed. Just because sometimes your parents get off track and they divorce doesn't mean that Christianity's wrong. Just because your youth pastor may drop out of the ministry and have a difficult time and have a season of sin doesn't mean that everything that he taught was wrong. You know, there were times when I wanted to pull up anchor. And I thought about it. I thought, you know, what's the worth of this? But you know, as I mentioned yesterday, I had purposed in my heart what I was supposed to do and where I was supposed to be. But like some of you, you know, sometimes I held to certain beliefs, but yet when those leaders of mine failed, I wanted to despair. You wanted to say, well, what's the use? I quit. I don't have a good attitude anymore. Maybe I ought to leave. I've had dear friends say, Eddie, you're a young youth pastor. You can go to a lot of different churches. You need to leave. I remember hearing those words standing in my driveway by some dear friends of mine. But you know, there were times that I wanted to get angry at the sea. But it wasn't necessarily the sea. It was sin. And you know, sin caused the waves to churn, and it caused the things around me. And you know what? I just decided to hold on and anchor in and stay. Amen. I felt licensed sometimes, you know, well, we've been here long enough. Maybe we can pull up anchor and let's try a different kind of church. Somebody else's sin, somebody else's mistakes doesn't give us a license to change. This book never changed. Young people, your mom and dad may fight and squabble and may even leave your home and destroy your brothers and sisters, but it doesn't give you a right to change. It doesn't give you a right to move on and not come to church anymore and not be faithful to the Lord, drop out of Bible college. It doesn't give you a right to do that. I didn't understand what my decisions meant back then. I'm not a good example of a lot of things, but one thing that my wife and I both have done, we stayed anchored. For 40 years now, we've served in this church. 40 years ago, I didn't know what it meant to really be anchored, but I do today. I want to ask my daughter and her family to come out, if you don't mind. Give me just a minute here. I have 2 children, a daughter, Stacy, my son, Matt. Matt couldn't be here tonight. My son-in-law, Dan Harrell, his dad played in the skits as Myron here. Dan's not as weird as his father. And these are my grandkids. Come on up here, guys. I didn't know during those times when we thought maybe we ought to move on, that one day my daughter, my son-in-law would both graduate from the same high school I did. My grandchildren all go to the same school. They're in Sunday school here. Won't be long before Ellie here is sitting in youth conference. And you know, kids, one of these days, you stay anchored in the harbor long enough, God will bless you with a lot of unique things. You can't move every time your pastor gets angry at you. You can't move when your parents get mad and leave the church. You can't move when a teacher treats you unkindly at school and singles you out and treats you unfairly. It's going to happen. You've got to stay faithful and stay anchored. I'm glad I did. Not for my sake, but for theirs. I never thought about grandchildren when I sat here as a teenager. I never thought about standing up here and bringing my grandchildren out and showing them off in front of a group of teenagers. And you're not thinking about that even right now, but one day you can. You can. Don't drift. Don't drift. Young ladies, help your husband stay anchored. Keep him in the ministry. When he's having a hard time, encourage him. Love him. Take care of him. But don't cause him. You need to be the kind of wife that encourages him to do right, not to get off track. I'm glad I stayed anchored. You've heard some Driftwood stories this week that I think would be very helpful to you. 40 years from now, I'd love to see you still anchored in the same harbor. Thank you.